Hi, everybody. Good to meet y'all. Glad to see this crew. We have a couple of disclaimers because I'm scared of HBO. Opinions are my own, etc. No employers or anything like that. The images and content are user free use and all that fun stuff. This is an older piece of content in terms of the game is a little bit old, but it's its 10th anniversary of when this event happened. So I think it's a really good time to chat about it, and I hope you feel the same. So we are talking Watch on Sunday, release on Friday, aka how we ran a week-long pipeline with Game of Thrones Ascent. Or if you prefer, when and where you should break the rules, because breaking rules is fun and sometimes useful. So before I get started again, I just want to say, I figured if I'm standing up here talking to you about releasing on Fridays, I better tell you a little bit about who I am. So who am I? Just ignore that. It has nothing to do with releasing on Fridays. But I'm Kristen. You might also hear some folks call me KJ. They, them. I'm Boston based, well, greater Boston, really. But I've been a producer in the game space for about 13 years now, since 2013. I worked on this game that I'm going to talk about. It was my first full-time producer gig, and yeah, it was a little bit ago. So I've been in licensed games for quite some time. Somehow, it seems like every time I move to a new gig, I'm working on a licensed game. Everything from The Walking Dead to My Little Pony, so it's a little bit of a spectrum there. And in terms of as a producer, what I care about is really setting clear expectations. I try to do that everywhere I go, and I want to create healthy dev environments where we can talk about issues and just solve them together. So, when we're talking about sustainable releases on Fridays, you'll see this kind of topic come up a lot. And yeah, I don't think people do their best work when they're scared. So my job as a producer is also to bring humor and empathy to game dev. Beyond that, here's a little bit of a look at my career. So I started out full-time at Disruptor Beam, went over to Hasbro for a few years as a licensing producer, spent some time at Congregate, and then made a shift over to PC and console games with Thought Pennies, and then most recently Brass Lion Entertainment. But before all that, I did internships and everything from web design and e-commerce to public access television to doing production on an animated film, Swan Princess Christmas, which was wild, and then making props for Lifetime movies. So I just kind of did a lot of things before I settled into and found really production for games. But that was quite some time ago. I did not have all of that experience back when this project came up. So let's set the scene. 2013, a bit ago. Game of Thrones Ascent is coming to the market. It's a little game, and it debuted on web in early 2013. It looked something like this. So it was a lot of 2D art in there, a lot of UI going on. We were free to play, so we had a lot of those mechanics that came with it, including daily rewards and timers and all of that. But like any good RPG, you would choose your character, your fealty, your background. There was different stats and different bonuses you got based on what you chose. You could also design your own banners. You could make your own house, name your own house within the world of Game of Thrones. And sometimes it was ugly, but sometimes they were cool, depending what you picked and how good of a designer you got. But in this main part of the UI, you could see we've got a lot of different buildings that you would purchase and upgrade. Those would give you different bonuses to stats. You'd have reductions of timers sometimes, maybe, and crafting bonuses, all sorts of that kind of stuff. And you would have an army of sworn swords. So each of those sworn swords had 3 different stats, basically trade, intrigue, and fighting, I think. So you could also add equipment. So they had 3 equipment slots. They could get wounded, they could be healed, and you would basically use them as your vector to send them out on quests, more or less, which is how you'd interact with the narrative of the show. So one of our main quest content vectors, of course, was quests. And they looked a little bit something like this. So you would have some dialogue up at the top. You would have a few options below that you could choose to branch your narrative. And the big part of it is what you see at the bottom there is that we would follow the show. So you could basically play alongside what was happening. Yeah. Oh, that's backwards. So when you were going through the quest, you would come to further decision points where you would have bigger forks in the storyline, and that would affect like whichever path you selected would affect the alignment to certain stats like the realm or to yourself, and that would also influence your story going down the various forks that we had. You would end up also reaching these action points. This is where you would assign your sworn sword. You would choose how to solve it if you were going to take a more like physical approach or an intrigue approach, which obviously was, part of the show as well, and how we echoed back the Game of Thrones series. And yeah, you could choose like if you want to send your strongest sworn sword or take your chances depending on your resources allocation availability at the time and all of that fun stuff. The timer, of course, free to play would play out, and at the end you would see how you did and you'd get some rewards, which brings us to our next content vector. So basically, we had quests and we had items, and these are the main pieces that we'll talk about as they talk about the pipeline itself. So we had a fairly extensive crafting system for a web and Facebook game. There were a lot of recipes and different things, and you could upgrade, based on the building and unlock some more. All kinds of different pieces that you could then assign to your sworn swords. And the items basically had 3 stats: battle, trade, intrigue. You could also have certain bits that would like increase by percentage, right? So you'd have different stats that were multiplicators, more or less, whatever the right word for that is. Something else about oh yeah, and then later on we introduced seals too, so you would have like 6 seal slots that you could swap in and out, so you could really get customized on those pieces. We would sell them in packs that we would advertise, and I was a little baby production intern, so I was making a lot of these graphics at the time, which was fun. But a lot of these items, as you can see, came straight from the show, more or less, right? So we are able to pull influence and direct screen representation of pieces you saw on the show a lot of the times. But we were up there for a long time, so we had some hits and some misses, right? Sometimes you have like Arya's face back. Looking back, I'm like, how did this one survive the archives? But anyway, there's all sorts of fun things if you dig through Facebook for this game. So we released content every week. Like every single week, we were releasing content, whether it was on the season, off the season. It was every week. But especially during the season, it was super, super important because that's when we had the most visibility. It was when we were most able to access players and advertise and just more easily get people in. We also brought in, lapsed users who hadn't played for a while and then remembered we exist and all of that. So the important part to this talk is that we did this during the season. So how did we do this? If we're honest, a lot of us got on planes and Amtrak, and we went down to HBO's office in New York City, and they would pull out a burned DVD that looked like this, with the old-fashioned like paper envelope and everything, and they'd put it into this little crappy DVD player, and we would sit there and watch the screeners for probably 4 or 5 hours at a time in a little room that was like kind of like this but kind of crappier. And we were just scribbling in the dark, scribbling everything that happened as much as we could during that time. Oh, and by the way, they weren't really done yet, so a lot of it kind of looked like this. And there was a lot of like the dragons are tennis balls on sticks, the dragons are traffic cones spouting fire. Like there was just still a lot of stand-in at the time. So we did our best, right? And then we would come back, we'd take Amtrak back, take the planes back, and we'd have like 1 or 2 months to really go and make everything happen. So we would outline and pitch the quest to HBO. Then we'd write all the quests. We'd be asking them for the photographic reference, anything they had on set, anything they had for promo images for the art books, whatever they could get us for costumes, weapons, props, the dragons, VFX, when they're done, like just something to get an idea of what we're looking at. And then we would just we'd order and make the arts, and then run all those quests and item arts through licensor approvals. We'd do edits where necessary, all of those things, implement, test everything, and then release it in episodic format week by week as things went by. So it was a lot, but I mean, at least we had a month or two, right? Well, the name of this talk doesn't really make it in a month or two. So a funny thing happened. The year is 2016. The show is about to eclipse the books. So, in addition to some issues that happened with leaks in certain areas, not our company, of course, but in other areas of the world and other offices, access to screeners was shut down and nobody had access. And this was a problem for us, as you can imagine. So, what was a producer to do? Probably scream a lot. Just really worried. But basically, you sit down and you identify the problem set, right? So we're talking about like, okay, we've got no more access to screeners. Nobody has access. There's nothing we can do. We can't change that. We know our game revenue goes up 100% during the season. That's an important part of our budget. That's an important thing that an important 10 weeks of the life cycle of our game. And we know that our players have had 3 years of weekly content. 3 seasons of watch it on Sunday, play it on Monday. They are accustomed to this, they expect this. And nobody wants to play the last week. Like the last episode of Game of Thrones, by the time the new one comes out, nobody's talking about last week's. So that one piece really set in motion the rest of this talk, the rest of this pipeline. We knew that it was important to our game to be able to get something out before the next episode aired. And we knew that we wanted to do it sanely and safely and not at the expense of anyone on our team or our culture or our mental health. So we sat down with a calendar and I looked at this and I drilled down into a couple of key beats, right? Okay, so we know that we are going to watch the episode Sunday night. That's when they come out. They're always coming out Sunday night. Something happens in the middle. Friday's our time to release, right? So we're not releasing Saturday morning because that would be wild. Friday, still wild, slightly less wild. And then by the time, if we do that, we've got some time to take a look at everything and just make sure everything's stable before we leave for the weekend. And Saturday, everybody's happy, right? We'll come back to the schedule, but in the meantime, want to talk a little bit back about quests and items. So I mentioned these are our 2 main content vectors in the game. Now, we're going to start off talking about how do we get items in the build in a week-long release cadence. So basically, this is one where we had a little bit more leeway to do some upfront work because we could do similarly to what we had done before, though a little bit different. We could still dissect every trailer, every Facebook ad, anything we saw frame by frame, start pulling screenshots, start anything. As soon as they started promoting things or there were leaks or anything, like, sometimes behind the scene photos show up, and you're like, okay, I can start to work with that. Just pull all those and use those to order art so that we've got it in the bank. And then asking for HBO, of course, we could ask them, like, hey, do you have any more info on this, any more screenshots, any more photos? They didn't always, but some of them came through, and they might have had something they could share with us. And then when art was ready, we were feeding it through the licensor approvals ahead of time as much as we could, right? So once we got them back, we'd pre-make the items and the stats. Sometimes often honestly with nonsense stand-in names, we know people went digging in our servers and all of that stuff. And so we kept as much secret as we could. Obviously, we didn't want to spoil anything, and we didn't know that much ourselves, so that part was easier this time around. But we still kept in the habit of that. And then when we saw the episode on Sunday night, we would see live what we basically would want to put in the build on Friday, right? So, excuse me. So we could start prepping those files to go into our build as soon as we saw it. So Monday morning, we could start to make some of those changes, flip those switches, and get ready to go. This was possible because at the end of the day, our items were basically just a JSON file and some PNGs at different resolutions. So that was something we were able to do quickly. It's easy, right? Pretty simple until you miss a parentheses, and then it all kinds of tends to fall apart. So let's talk testing. So our build environments when I joined, it looked something like this, right? We had our continuous integration. We had staging that we would push up to when we were getting ready to release and to test and smoke test, and then of course prod. And during the time that I was there, we added a hotfix environment. So hotfix would basically mimic production, but so we would always have a version of production available that we could put a small targeted fix into, or sometimes even just edit the server code directly. I know that folks sometimes worry about something like this because it can get out of date and everything like that. But if your hygiene is really good, if your process is good, and your devs are good, it was no problem for us almost ever keeping it up to date, and so that worked well for us. But for this effort, we added another. So we added a content branch where we basically, it was similar to hotfix, and it worked effectively the same, but we still had hotfix available to us if something went wrong, anything went wrong code-wise. But our content was the only thing that we pushed up to the content environments. And it can seem like a lot, but it was important for this process with how fast we were moving to be able to do that. So when we implemented the content on the branch, it would just be that, no code changes, nothing like that, just content, so that we could minimize risk on that aggressive schedule. And of course, we had staging available, so the engineers who were working on the next big things could continue to use that, and QA could also continue to look at staging when they weren't looking at our content stuff. We also had some back-end tools available to us, specifically around offers and rotating them in and out of the shop. So this meant that we could assemble item packs and swap them in and out in deals without doing builds or anything. And so that helped a lot too. So we could basically, if we had some new items but not enough for a whole pack, we could incorporate some older items that maybe were showcased in that episode that we already had, and we could easily make that offering to players and stay relevant. So yeah, so that was cool. Don't forget your validators, because we did that a few times, but this meant that we could have items. So we could have items on our week-to-week schedule for this implementation. The harder part slightly was quests. So we are going to bring back that calendar. It's going to turn into a white screen, guard your eyes. So this is all clean. It's all nice. Producer's dream, right? Let's mark it up. So we started to work backwards. We knew Friday was our release day. We're not going to release on Saturday. That's just silly. So it has to be Friday. And if we do that, that means we're testing on Thursday. Our typical smoke test was running 2 to 3 hours. And more comprehensive regression testing was maybe running about 1 to 2 days. We had lowered it a bit and honed in on that a bit to make it more streamlined, because we were running on a weekly schedule to begin with. Not always this aggressive weekly schedule, but we were releasing weekly. And so, yeah, and our build times, I should mention as well, were about 1 to 2 hours. So we had that, we were able to be kind of nimble there. That I realize is not true for every project, but being a lot of image-based and text-based, we basically sectioned off Thursday for testing, which included if we had to rebuild to catch any fixes as well. We were able to do that a few times. So if we look at Wednesday then as our target day for implementing our JSON files and really getting everything up to speed, then that meant we had Monday and Tuesday to write the quests and do anything else that we needed to do. And so the question went from, can we do anything, to how much can we do in 2 days? How much can we get done in 2 days? But it meant that we had 2 days. So, that's not nothing. Easy. I know what you're thinking, though. We're still on an HBO Game of Thrones game. It's a license game. What about licensor approvals? Well, this was definitely a factor for us. We needed 24-hour licensor approval times. And for folks who have kind of been around the block before with licensors, it's kind of wild to ask that. It's not easy, and we just kind of did it, right? So how did we do it? I just asked them, honestly. We had a good relationship with HBO, and we didn't ask for a lot. We were a small partner, and I like to think that we had a good partnership on both sides. So when we needed this, I gave them the information that I've given you all, talking about our player base, talking about our revenue, talking about what the expectations are on both sides, from players, from us, from HBO, all of these things. And we've been working with them, for at least 3 years, and we trusted each other. So they agreed. And, I think it helped that we were just asking, hey, this is just for the 10 weeks that the show is going on. And after that, we'll go back to our usual cadence. But for now, this is what we need. And yeah, they did that, and it was great. So I think the takeaway there for me on my side is just like, you want to build trust with your partners before you need it, before you need to ask for favors. We had fantastic writers throughout the course of this project. I love them all dearly, and they did a wonderful, wonderful job every time. Outside this process, throughout the whole career there, of just being able to show HBO, we understand your brand, we understand what's happening, we're able to move chess pieces around like you do to make this story interesting when you're not playing as one of the characters in the show. And so they really did a lot of the bulk work of building up this trust. But I like to think I helped too, because I was managing the relationship with them and talking to them on a daily basis of just like, hey, talking through to HBO, saying, hey, here's where we're at, here's our process, here's the information that you need to know, and don't make wizard beards. They had a real problem with wizard beards, not on brand for Game of Thrones. So anyway, all that to say, we worked hard to earn their trust, and to keep it going throughout this process. And it really helps in a time like this, and it helps them say yes, and that they did. So I'm on board. HBO's on board. Is the team on board? I had been in touch with my leads. We'd been getting some of this info in place. We were a pretty small team, so my leads is like 33% of the team, but don't be fooled by that. Anyway, I brought it all together to the team as a whole. Probably looked a little bit like this with a little schedule in there, but I pitched the pipeline to the whole team, and I honestly didn't feel like it went that well. It was a little bit quiet, and I could sense that people weren't really sold on it. So, what now? Team's nervous. I get it. It's different. It's different. I know I had mentioned we were releasing weekly, but making the content within that week and releasing it, definitely different. So, I heard them out, and basically some of the pieces we were concerned with was, can we actually get a clean build that quickly? Can we get it through the testing in time? Would the players be happy with less content? Again, we're talking about 2 days to make as much content as we can. Are they going to be happy with, it being a little bit less than they're used to? And would HBO stick those 24-hour turnaround times? We'll find out. I still felt like, as a producer for the team, I'd worked with them a while. I believe that the answer to all those is like, we could do it. We can get through that. And it's important to do for keeping the game going. So talking to them and having the data that I had, I asked them to trust me and try it. I said, let's try it for 1 week. Let's give it a go. We're not going to announce that we're going to do this to the players. We're not going to announce we're going to do it for 10 weeks. No public promises, nothing like that. And on Friday afternoon, we will come back together and we will talk as a team, and we'll see if we want to keep going. If we want to try this again the week after, if we want to keep going through even more than that. So one of the things that I think was useful about this too is that I had already scheduled the meeting for Friday. I'm like, this meeting is on the books. I'm going to hear you out. If you try it with me, then we will come back and talk about this. And so we did it. Like, we tried it against this schedule. And I think, so basically like Tuesday afternoon, we'd send the quests out to HBO for licensor approval. On Wednesday, we would get them back end of day, and Thursday would test, Friday release, and then we would monitor the rest of the day for live issues before we hit the weekend. And we nailed it. I mean, they did it. They did it. And, there's certainly things that were qualifiers about that. Like, it wasn't the same amount of content. It was about half as much content as our usual weekly release, because it was about half as much time, as it turns out. And it wasn't perfect all the time, but I was talking to a few folks as I was making this deck, and none of us could remember a time that we ended up working into Saturday, not for the content. We've certainly had times in other areas of the project, like specifically our alliance versus alliance system was very complex and very fragile at times. We definitely had times that we had to get in early or fix some problem. I remember one specific Thanksgiving that we were dealing with that system. But for this particular process, we finished it all on Friday and we had no troubles. We had, I think, one time when we pushed it to noon, or like pushed the release to like 1 p.m. instead of like 6 a.m. Because I was up pressing the buttons at 6 a.m. to release the builds anyway. But we never pushed into the weekend, which was really cool. So we kept our sanity there, except of course Sunday night watching the episodes was a little bit of weekend work. But let's be honest, we were going to watch them anyway. Did we keep a sane development cycle throughout? We sure did. So I think so. And from what I've heard from other folks, and I checked in during the time and everything like that. Yes, we kept it sane, which was one of our goals. And we maintained the same metrics throughout that season as well. Even though it was less content, we were able to maintain our metrics, which in a free to play game, that's kind of, you know, your lifeblood, so to speak. And for a lot of us, it's still something that we look back on. I mean, you know, talking about this 10 years later, there's a reason for that. It was just cool. I mean, the ability to be scrappy like that, the ability to stay relevant like that, the ability to get something into the game after watching it Sunday night was just really cool. And when all was said and done, we decided to do it again the next season. We were in the same position. We didn't have screener episodes. The show was even farther ahead of the books at that point, and all of that. So they did it again, and they did it each season after that for as long as the game lived. So it was really cool to pull that together and to see it happen. So just to summarize, you know, there's definitely a lot that worked in our favor to be able to pull this off. We had low dependency content pipelines. There wasn't a lot of hangups in there. Obviously, licensor approvals is one of the dependencies, but you know, we made that work. Using a hotfix strategy reduced risk in testing times for us across those releases. Excuse me. Smoke tests and build times were low to begin with. Obviously, you know, there's some challenges there. If you've got a bigger game, you may not be able to do something like that. We also had a small, tight-knit team. We'd worked together for years. We knew the product. We were used to releasing weekly already. We had, you know, data available to us, tools available to us, and familiarity with each other, so that, you know, we could have conversations about how this was going and if we would, you know, if we'd do it again. And the strong relationship with our IP holder, I mentioned that, like, it really helped a lot when we got into this pinch, and just being able to show that we know what we're doing, so they can trust that they won't have to fine tooth comb everything that we send them during those weeks. And we knew and acknowledged what our players expected, right? But we dialed back the scope so that we could be sane. We could have reasonable expectations for ourselves, and you know, just use those to meet our goals. So some takeaways as a result of going through this, I think, you know, just keeping in mind that low budget content pipelines can help you stay scrappy. They can help you stay relevant because you can move faster. And just sitting down and defining what you can't move. What are the parameters that you can't mess around with, and that will give you some guardrails, right, on what needs to be done. I found also that time boxing was really helpful psychologically as we looked through this. We weren't asking for, you know, okay, do 20 quests. We were like, just get done what you can get done in 2 days, and we'll release that. And also, you know, going back to the try it for 1 week, that's kind of a time box as well, right? Like, let's give it a shot for 1 week and see how it goes. It just helps to wrap your brain around that. And yeah, as a piece of that, I mentioned already, pre-schedule the time to regroup and just show that you're committed to hearing the feedback from your team. That stuff's important, and act on it. Obviously, don't ask for feedback if you're not going to do anything with it. Be sure you're ready to take that feedback. Build trust with your partners, of course, before you need it. This applied both to HBO, but also the internal team. I know that, like, when I talked through this pipeline, it was scary and it was different. And you know, I think I got by a bit because the team trusted me and I trusted them to be able to do it. And, you know, as always, right, you want to work with your experts, ask for help where you need it. It definitely was a little bit of a plea to HBO of like, to make this happen, we need you to do X and by Y date. And sometimes, you know, just keep in mind, right, you can push the boundaries on what you thought was possible. And I think as a producer, that's a really it's one of the coolest times in my career because I was looking at the data and I was pretty sure we could pull it off, but the team didn't feel great about it. And I believed in them, I don't know, a lot. Like, I don't know what to say. I don't want to make it sound like it was, just based on vibes, but between like looking at everything I've seen them do and all of that, it's just, as a producer, when you can't make the content yourself often, it feels good to be able to push the team into something they didn't think was possible, while obviously not sacrificing the health or sanity of the team. So that's important. So break the rules sometimes. Just be careful about it. So likewise, I think there's just something cool about doing something you didn't think you could do, and doing it as a team. So obviously, this is much bigger than me. There was a ton of people that had a part in Game of Thrones Ascent over the years. At the time that we did this, we were a smaller team. I think around like 7 or 8 people, so we were quite tight. But a lot of people contributed over the years, and not all of them I could list on this slide. So yeah, that's my bit about just how we released stuff in 1 week with Game of Thrones Ascent. So thank you, and if you'd like more info, the game was shut down in 2019, so a lot of the historical data has kind of disappeared since then. But the fan wiki is still up, so just you can check that out. Game archiving, obviously, super important, valuable work. Thanks to folks who do that work, and thanks for listening, because it's cool to just revisit this after a good chunk of time. Happy to answer questions. Yes.
It sounds like, from what I'm hearing, one of the ways you were able to be successful on this is that the stage itself was fairly locked in, and you were working on a very intense content pipeline. Would you ever be wanting to add new features to the game? And if so, how did you get that in?
Yeah, for sure.
You can start with the question back just for the recording.
Yeah, let me see. So I think the question is basically, would we ever be wanting to implement features alongside this crazy content pipeline? And the answer is yes. We were working on features throughout the course of this, but we just made the decision we weren't releasing any of that, but like during those 10 weeks. And so we tried to make sure that we got them in ahead of the season starting, or after the season starting, preferably before, because again, we see a groundswell in users that came into the game during that time. But we still maintained, as I mentioned, the hotfix environment was available to us if we saw something that broke. Like I mentioned, the alliance versus alliance feature. So that is the kind of feature that we'd start a phase between builds sometimes. So sometimes everything with a build looks cool until you turn on your timed event, and then things break down. So that would be available to us if like something in that broke, we'd be able to make a code fix there. But otherwise, we would have the continuous integration going. We'd bump that build up to staging and test the feature work against that as we go. So we definitely had that possibility, but for the sake of the team, for the most part, we were like, okay, we're not doing those kinds of releases during this 10-week window when the season is on. Yes.
How did decision making for the content you're making go every week?
Yeah.
Multiple people involved, or was it just like?
For sure. Yeah. So the question was, how did the decision-making process go for the content that was included? And the answer to that is basically threefold. So we had a writer who was basically manning the ship on all the quest sides. She got to make a lot of the decisions on that. She had a really good head for that, so she made her best decisions there. We had a designer who would basically make the decision from a balance point of view on items. So he would be implementing the items and their stats. And then we had a product owner who would be making decisions of like, what do we want to, who would have input kind of to some of those item stats and things like that of, hey, here's the type of item I think would be doing well. Here's the kind of packet that we want to bunch those items together. Here's what we want to offer. Here's what I'm seeing on sales data, and make some adjustments there. But the good news is each of those three kind of had a clear lane to make their own decisions about that. And of course, like we would bring, like HBO would know what items and art and stuff like that, and they'd see the quests. But as far as like creative input goes, there wasn't much coming back from them on that point of view. It was more like if something came up, they'd clarify a detail, or that was pretty much it. We didn't get a lot of feedback during that high pressure time, things like that.
Was there like interdependence between those? So like the writer had to finish their work so that the tuning could start, or
Yeah, so question was, is there interdependence between those pipelines? The answer is not really. So that was one of the things that let us move really fast, and like we could kind of each have our own lane, because besides talking through the game designer balance and the product owner and what they wanted to offer to sell, the quests worked pretty independently from the items. You could basically, from a player perspective, you'd go into the shop and buy items. We weren't giving away those premium items, so from that point of view, they existed separately. On some occasions, like in previous, off-season content and things like that, we would have times where we would request new quest art. So on the screen itself, there's like a wide landscape image. We would ask once in a while for, like, for example, I think one of the seasons they first showed Dorn, and we just didn't have enough Dorn variety, so we would request some of that. And from that point of view, like the quest and the writers would be like, okay, well, we don't have anything to show in this, so can we get a Dorn picture? But it wasn't like they were crossing over as much with items. Does that help? It really helped us move faster, honestly.
yeah, that makes a lot.
It's the same thing of like, 2D versus like 3D. We weren't talking about like making 3D characters, which would totally blow all of this up or anything like that, or animation. So, we had some parameters to help us move faster. I think I saw one back there.
Yeah, this is, first of all, this is a great talk. Thanks for sharing. Mostly what I know about Game of Thrones is a show about characters dying.
Yeah.
So my question is, week to week, because you couldn't plan beyond that, were there ever situations where like a quest was designed or an item was added and then like shortly thereafter it becomes irrelevant or is removed? And if so, does that ever like almost have like gameplay or mechanical implications where it's like we added this thing but like now it's gone and we have like a weird hole in our system? Like did anything like that ever come up?
Yeah, good question. So the question was, obviously in Game of Thrones, characters die a lot, things change a lot, things get outmoded a lot. Was there ever a time where, because of that and because of our week-to-week schedule, did we ever like hit a kind of brick wall, more or less, right? Did we hit a spot where we couldn't use anything or something was not useful anymore? And this is one of those areas where it's like your curses are your blessings, or what's it like? Your parameters are your gifts in some ways. Game of Thrones is also a show that has many different points of view, and you're constantly swapping between, okay, you're with the Starks in Winterfell, you're with the, Martells and Dorne, you're wherever. And so when they had built the game early on, they knew that a typical, okay, you're this one character wasn't going to work really. So the quests and the part of the RPG that you take on is that you are the leader of a house, and yes, you may be located in one spot, but you have this like army of advisors, you have this core cast of advisors that you can send out to different areas. And those are more NPCs than they are the sworn swords that I spoke of. So we had like Maester Lucas, you'd have a Maester, you'd have a I forget who else. Anyway, so you'd have one of them, and the writer would basically send them on the storylines alongside. So say in season 1, I know I said spoilers, but like, season 1, that Stark is killed, your envoy like watches it happen and reports back to you via, either coming home or something like that. So in those situations, we were able to make sure that like we were just built in a way that made it easy to bring the story back to your character, because they can't kill characters that aren't in the show. But we certainly had things like items that would show up once in an episode that we made, and then they never are seen again. So that does happen, but at the same time, because in the game they have more value than that, they've got stats, they've got things that that you're applying to the swords or whatever, then they still have some inherent value, and players seem to, I think most of the players were really about the stats at the end of the day, right? So there's a piece of that, but there are a portion of players that have the sentimental value of, oh, I like this character. This is my favorite character. I have the whole set of Tyrion's items, or I have all of Pedro Pascal's items, but he's not here anymore. So we certainly had to maneuver it, but it wasn't ever a show-stopping. Like, we built this whole character model, and now we can't use it anymore, which was really great. We also didn't have character likenesses because of the, I think, as I understand the deal, like, you have to, for this IP, you have to go to each of the actors individually, and so we avoided some of that as well. You'd just be like, you'd have Tyrion's armor, you don't have Tyrion, stuff like that. So, yeah. You had a question, Jen?
I have basically the same question.
Oh, all right. Anything else? Yeah.
You said that players didn't enjoy playing last week's episode. So does that mean that really the game was played for the most part of Friday, Saturday, Sunday?
So in execution, that statement is more of a theory than data driven, but just the assumption of like coming into work coming into work on a Monday morning, nobody's talking about 2 weeks back Game of Thrones. They're all talking about what happened last night on Game of Thrones. So there's a bit of that. In terms of I think pretty much everything that I've seen from data says that like audience is higher on weekends a lot to begin with. So I might be wrong because it's been a while, and also people play during the workday. So I don't know. But anyway, we didn't see, as far as I can recall, like we didn't see a steep drop off that aligned to changing our release cadence from like a Monday to a Friday, say. So I didn't see a strong correlation of like, oh, they go through this. We did struggle with specifically during the off season, our content was a lot longer because it's 42 weeks of the year versus 10 weeks of the year. So we did run into an issue of like the people who were hitting the long tail of content is of course going to be very small. I think it was like 1 or 2%. So we did run into like, okay, that's a challenge. But during the season, we didn't see like, okay, they're logging in, playing through this. We saw more people that had engaged strongly throughout the course of the game, coming back to the game at that time, as far as I can recall. But it's a good question. Yeah, and the timers helped too. Being free to play, you have some mechanics in place to have them come back in another 12 hours, so it spaced out some content as well. Cool. Anything else? We're just about at time anyway, so thank you all. Appreciate it.